Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for being here. My name is Angie Mock. I'm the CEO and publisher of the San Antonio Report, and so excited that you guys are here with us to kick off our 2023 Cityfest. Cityfest is a week-long ideas festival produced by the San Antonio Report, and this year's theme is Meet the Moment. So throughout the week, we are going to be exploring various inflection points that are happening in Bexar County that are important to us all. And so if you want to take advantage of all we have to offer, go to cityfestsa.org and you'll find the full lineup of programming. There's something for everyone. And if you like happy hours, we're doing a kickoff happy hour tonight, a free happy hour at La Gloria at Brooks, and we'll start at 5 o'clock, and we'll invite you all to come. You do need to go to cityfestsa.org to register, but please come and help us celebrate all that is unique and wonderful about the south side of San Antonio. Happy to have you guys in the audience. I know we've got well over 100 folks that are turning in virtually, so tuning in virtually. Thank you for being here. We're joined by a number of our board members right here on the front row. Wave your hand. We're so happy for you guys. Behind every great nonprofit is a great board, and you guys certainly exemplify that. Thanks to our sponsors. So, you know, we publish our journalism never behind a paywall, and most of our civic engagement events that we do throughout the year are also free to the public, but we could not do this without support. Supporting us this year, our presenting sponsor is the City of San Antonio. Our change maker sponsor is Bexar County. Our engagement sponsor is Shiner Beer. And this morning's program sponsor is AARP. You guys, they make it possible for us to do civic engagement like no one else is doing it in this city. So a round of applause for our sponsors. We're excited to have City Manager Erik Walsh center stage with our editor Lee Munsell to kick us off for Cityfest 2023. So without further ado, I'll give it to our editor Lee Munsell.
Thank you. Thank you all. Hi, hello. Welcome to San Antonio Files. My name is Lee Munsell. I'm the editor-in-chief of the San Antonio Report, and I'm joined today by Erik Walsh, the city manager of San Antonio, to have a conversation about Bexar County's growth and San Antonio's growth and what that means for our community. So if you'll join me in thanking Erik Walsh for being here. Now, a native of San Antonio, Erik Walsh began serving as city manager on March 1st, 2019. He leads the city's operations, organizational development, budget, fiscal policy, and contract management. Previously, Walsh worked as deputy city manager and assistant city manager. He's a product of Central Catholic High School and has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a Master of Science in Urban Administration from Trinity University right here in San Antonio. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Our theme for Cityfest 2023, as Angie just mentioned, is Meet the Moment, which actually jumps off in a way a sit-down we did with Mayor Nirenberg earlier this year about his priorities for his final term. At the time, we talked a lot about the momentum that was building in San Antonio, from excitement over the Spurs and other local sports efforts to the rebound of tourism and demographic growth that we're seeing in our city and county. Now, what the mayor said in June was that our moment is now, and all the stars are aligned, he said, and the world is going to see what San Antonio has been working toward and capable of for so many years. Now, I would say that's a very optimistic sentiment, but as city manager, you're the person who's tasked with much of the responsibility for managing that growth. The actual execution of meeting the moment in many ways is up to you. So to start, can you talk a little bit about this moment of growth and what it means for San Antonio from your seat as city manager?
Well, I'm optimistic also that, you know, San Antonio, the corridor between San Antonio and Austin, is one of the fastest growing corridors in the country. We're an old city with old infrastructure. And so, the balance that I think that we have to strike is continuing to make sure that from housing, from an infrastructure standpoint, the airport's a big piece of this, that we are building the infrastructure for that growing city, while also maintaining what we have. And that's not anything that any other large municipality in this country has to deal with. But because of the rapid growth that we have seen and that we will continue to see, it means we've got to do it. We've got to do it right. We've got to do it thoughtful. And the mayor and the council have laid out a number of priorities that we're executing on. $1.2 billion bond program, our largest ever. And we're all in design. So, you drive around and you see all of the construction. None of that is from the $1.2 billion bond program. So progress is going to be painful. But it's that balance and making sure that we're being responsive to the changing environment. And all of that is underlaid with the belief and the desire that, you want San Antonio to stay San Antonio. So it's a big task, but a lot of positive things.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the bond because that's something I wanted to ask about. So we'll jump ahead a little bit. But as you mentioned, many of the 2017 bond projects are still kind of reaching their completion or in the process of being completed, and we're already well into the 2022 cycle. The bond the city successfully asked voters to approve last May was the biggest in city history at a total price tag of $1.2 billion. But when you pass a bond that big, you know this better than anyone, you have to make sure the staffing's in place to pull it off. You have to find and work with contractors, for example. When it comes to road projects, construction projects, you have to keep them on schedule so that they're as non-disruptive to local business as possible. So I wanted to ask, have the size of our bonds exceeded our ability to execute on them?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think when you look at the 2017 bond program, there's 8 or 9 projects that are in construction or haven't begun. Half of them are due to changes that TxDOT made. 3 or 4 of them are projects that were also added into the 22 bond program. There are 2 or 3 projects that I think probably won't pan out. One of them is Lone Star. That 2017, the voters approved the project in that area, and that development hasn't happened. So we'll need to think through what we do with that. A year ago, we added capacity to be able to deliver a much larger bond program, to your point. And part of the thinking is, and the commitment is that by the time the voters go back to the ballot in 2027, that 90% of those projects will be completed or under construction. And that's what we're staffed for. Undoubtedly, you can always do things better. I think the council's given us the tools to better hold contractors accountable under state law. We're trying to improve how we communicate to the public or to the business community or the corridor. We are working hard with SAWS. I mean, the trick here is that if we're spending $10 million on a street that hadn't been worked on in 50 years, we ask ourselves the question, along with SAWS and CPS, does that underlying infrastructure need to be updated? Because if we haven't touched the street in 50 years, I'm positive SAWS hasn't. It's real easy for us to design sidewalks, lights, and streets, and then construct that. But we take a full approach. The last thing I want to do is spend $10 million on a street, and 2 years later the sewer main breaks because it's 60 years old, and we got to redo it all. So we partner with SAWS and CPS to replace that infrastructure, and that can be painful. I've seen this video of construction in Europe where they shut everything down for 4 days and they build a bridge. And so I have these dreams that we can do that here. And so in the 2020 bond, or the 2022 bond program, we're in design right now. We'll start bidding those contracts, those projects in about a year. And we're going to change the way we do them. We're going to want contractors to finish them a lot sooner.
Okay, and how do you plan to enforce that actually occurs?
Well, part of it may be incentivizing them.
Okay.
Right? I mean, we give them a timeline for a street. And maybe we need to cut that back and then incentivize them to get done earlier. I mean, the contractors are bidding on work, and they've got crews over here, they've got crews over here. I want all the crews, and I want in and out. And there are cities in this country that have done it like that. And so I think we're going to have to be creative and not do it like we did the 2017 bond program. The expectations are high. And with that much construction, as undoubtedly the 2027 bond program will be as big as the 2022, we're going to need to do a better job of managing that and executing that.
And so what's your message to local businesses who are concerned about, construction happening on their streets or things taking a while?
Well, stay engaged.
Okay.
I mean, stay engaged. I mean, I think we have improved our communication to those corridors or those neighborhoods. I personally stay engaged, but businesses have to stay engaged. And part of what we started last year was making sure that we add things like marketing for those businesses within our organization. The work of social media influencers to help guide that traffic back. Undoubtedly, when a street is torn up, we want to make sure that people still have access. You know, Lee, I was out of town this weekend in a smaller town, but a growing town, and I noticed construction on a commercial corridor that was completely closed. The street was completely closed. There wasn't one lane open. They just closed it, and they were working on Sunday. This is yesterday. And so we always want to make sure that we've got traffic flow, but in some cases, maybe we shouldn't, right? If we can get out of there in 3.5 months versus 9.5 months, then maybe we should be looking at that. So I think as we go through that bond program, those are conversations we'll have with those corridors because they should have a lot of input in that decision.
Interesting. You're already kind of doing this, and one of the things I wanted to ask you, I believe you've spent your whole professional career in San Antonio kind of making your way up the ranks in the city, and you're from here, you went to school here, but it seems like you're looking to other cities perhaps across the nation and across the world that maybe could be a good example for San Antonio. Do you have any cities you have your eye on that could be our future?
No. No, but I think you can always learn from others, and in a number of different areas. And I think that some cities and towns, maybe even smaller than San Antonio, have a different approach. I think it's good from a management standpoint to see what works best, tweak it for San Antonio, because at the end of the day, whether it's public safety or public works or the airport, we want to be the best, and we want to be thoughtful, and we want to be intentional. We want to execute whatever the mission is, and there's plenty of examples around the country of things that people do good.
Interesting. Any that you like the most? What was the city you were in this weekend?
Tuscaloosa.
Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
And they're shutting down the street.
They shut down the whole street. They're
okay.
working on Sunday.
Okay.
So I was like, damn it, why aren't we doing that?
Tuscaloosa can do it. Yeah. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the scale of growth of what we're talking about right here. Bexar County, which houses San Antonio, is one of the fastest growing geographic areas in the country. We're consistently at the top of the pack in terms of annual population growth for major cities with more than 2 million residents, and Greater San Antonio is projected to welcome another 1 million new residents between 2010 and 2040. So some of that has already happened. Tomorrow, we're going to have our Cityfest keynote speaker and another native San Antonian, U.S. Census Bureau Director Robert L. Santos, talk more about that growth and what it means. But for today, I'd like to ask you, how hard is it to manage growth on that scale? How do you make the changes to infrastructure, all of that, as people are already arriving?
It's difficult, and it's difficult because we've got $3 billion worth of street and sidewalk need. We've got $2.5 billion worth of drainage need. So prioritizing and making sure that we're maintaining our infrastructure is really key. And part of that is the work of having a strategic housing implementation plan, where I feel like the city worked hard in advance of it really being a crunch in San Antonio, where we have a plan with targets. We have funded it. We have executed it. The voters have approved a housing bond in 2022 of $150 million. And, we've contracted out $81 million of that already. There are 4,500 housing units under development in the pipeline as a result, and we'll contract the rest of it out this year. But we've moved quickly because time is money, and prices go up and values go up, and more people arrive, and there are neighborhoods, older neighborhoods that are changing. There are infill challenges that the council deals with on almost a weekly basis from a zoning perspective. So making sure that you're moving all of those balls down the field is key. You can't just focus on one of them.
Yeah. Much of the growth in our housing stock in recent years has been to the north and west sides of town, as well as on the south side, which has added some more sprawl to an already extremely sprawling city. What portion of any future housing stock that we add needs to be infill versus sprawl? And how do you get developers to be partners on efforts to infill our city with more housing versus vacuuming up more land on the outskirts? Well,
it's a balance between working with the neighborhoods and the city not making it difficult. And certainly there are some neighborhoods that have already started you start to see that transformation. But developers and neighborhoods have to communicate. The city has to be a good facilitator, and we can't make rules burdensome. We are never not going to sprawl. I mean, and as much as, and this is strictly from my perspective, we are not going to be a landlocked San Francisco. We are not Manhattan. We will continue to sprawl. But I think that coming with that is the infrastructure challenges, the roadways. And some of that happens outside the city of San Antonio. But how is the city and the county working to make sure that those road systems, those infrastructure systems are built to be able to continue to withstand that? And whether that is out west, out east, out I-10, or down on the south side, it will continue to sprawl. There's a lot of open property down there, and I don't think it's realistic. Now, I'm only the city manager, right? So I don't think it's realistic to say that we're not going to have that. We have to make sure that we're growing smartly. We have to make sure that people can move, and that we're thoughtful, the big we, because some of this may be the county, that we're thoughtful together about building in the infrastructure for fire stations or libraries or bike lanes or things that are going to be those needed amenities that people will expect.
Got it. And are you concerned about housing affordability as we sprawl and more people are coming into San Antonio? And of course, I would imagine you are, but how are you working on that issue?
Well, part of that is deploying that $150 million as quickly as possible. There are examples of other cities in this state, actually, that issued housing bonds, but haven't spent the money yet, and they've been sitting on them because they don't have a plan or they haven't executed them. So what we're doing is trying to push that $150 million out as soon as possible to try to get ahead of that curve. You have supply, the cost of construction has gone up, interest rates are sky high, and what we've seen from a permitting standpoint, residential permits have kind of flatlined or decreased, exactly what the Fed wanted. Commercial permits are still increasing, but growth is slowing, and that'll put pressure on prices. Availability in stock, people moving. I'm not sure the city can actually control all that. What we can do is take our piece and get it deployed as soon as possible.
Interesting. Yeah, we just had a story this morning that said that San Antonio made the list of top 10 real estate markets to watch for the first time, jumping up to number 8 from number 21 on last year's list. The other Texas cities among the emerging trends in real estate top 10 were Austin, ranked 5th, and Dallas-Fort Worth, which came in 3rd. And I would say that the affordability of housing in Bexar County compared to the rest of the country is a big factor in our growth in San Antonio as people leave the coast and head for places like Texas. But as we grow, it gets harder to maintain enough housing that's affordable for people who are already here and in lower income brackets, which we have a lot of poverty. San Antonio's some of the most poverty of any major U.S. city. So how do you balance those two things together at the same time?
Well, I mean, I think it's a balance between market housing and affordable housing. It's not one or the other. And so, I think when you look at infill opportunities versus new construction on the outskirts of the city limits, market and affordability, I think there's a balance there. I don't think it's one or the other. In my mind, the economy doesn't work that way. There's got to be a balanced growth. Our role is not to make it burdensome, make it efficient, and as long as there are opportunities to grow, again, whether that is on the outskirts of town or that's an infill, then I think the market will drive some of that. Where we can tip the scale a bit is on the deployment of affordable housing dollars and making sure that from a location standpoint, you've got a good geographical spread of affordable housing. That's where the city can help on that, and from that standpoint. But we've been able to rapidly deploy that $81 million because we've partnered with the private sector or nonprofits to be able to do that construction. So I think that's really key for us to get that out as quickly as possible.
Great. One of the most challenging issues our city is facing right now is homelessness. The city's 2024 budget invested heavily in efforts like prevention programs, outreach workers, shelters, and more cleanup operations at encampments. How long will it be until we start seeing a return on those most recent investments for efforts that are newer to San Antonio or a bit more experimental, like low barrier permanent supportive housing? Have you given yourself a benchmark when you need to see them succeeding before you try a different approach?
Well, I've told the staff last week that's what I wanted, but in my mind, it is probably by January, February. We have increased resources. Let me back up a second. We did a budget survey this year and hired a group out of state that does kind of scientific, statistically valid surveys, and homeless encampments were the #1 issue in 9 of the 10 council districts, and it was #2 in the 10th. And so clearly, encampments and homeless outreach is top of mind for the general public. And so part of what we've done, and it's the first time we've ever done this, the last point in time count earlier this year had a little over 800 unsheltered individuals that were counted. And we've set a benchmark this year to get 400 of them into shelter. We're doing that a number of different ways. One, because of those investments that the city's made, we've got permanent supportive housing developments that opened up earlier this year. We're using the last of our ARPA dollars to open a low barrier shelter so that we've got a place for people to go. And then we increased our encampment cleanup opportunities and resources, and that's literally staff or contracts where we'll go and clean up. And I think the second commitment that we made to the public this year was that if you call 311, we'll do the outreach, which is a necessary part of this. I mean, between the outreach workers that the city has and our partners, that outreach is key to getting folks into a place. Unfortunately, the batting average when they first work that is probably south of 20%. But it's about establishing a relationship. But if you call about an encampment, we'll do the assessment, the outreach, and the cleanup within 2 weeks. And so those are the two measuring sticks that I've got. We certainly have to be more responsive. And maybe the third thing that we're gonna be more intentional about is better communicating with those neighborhoods that are impacted or those commercial corridors, because a lot of times we haven't done a really good job of that. And I think that's one of the things I heard this summer from a number of groups, and making sure that if you call in, what's the status of that? And we make sure that we keep the neighborhood informed. I met with the our outreach workers and our partners' outreach workers at the beginning of summer after we saw the survey results. And that's a really hard job, Lee. I'll tell you that that group goes to a lot of places most folks wouldn't. And that is really hard work, and my hat's off to them. But I asked them, I go, work with this sense of urgency. Pretend like you live next door to it. And that's the follow-up we want. And so my measuring sticks for that, and we'll be reporting to the council probably quarterly, is going to be how many of those 874 have we gotten in, because our target is 400, and are we turning around 2 weeks or less?
What are you hearing from those outreach workers themselves? Do they have any creative suggestions about better ways to handle? I mean, just doing a cleanup and moving the problem somewhere else may not necessarily be a fix. And obviously we're talking about real people's needs when they're in this position of homelessness. And so it's a very complicated issue. No one disagrees that it's a very complicated issue, but what are you hearing from people who are closest to it about ways that it could be addressed creatively?
So one of the things we heard from the outreach workers is we needed more low barrier shelter. And it's the reason why we're spending our last $17 million on a hotel for the next 2 years, because I think the frustrating part from the outreach workers was that if they found someone who wanted to go, they didn't have a place to take them. And so we needed a place to take them. And that was one of the things that we got to that from the feedback from the outreach workers. Secondly, it's a balance between being compassionate but being responsive. And talk about cities that have not done it right or have had similar challenges. You can't ignore it. You can't just enforce it with police. You've got to be consistent. And this was a big topic in every one of the budget town halls that we went through in August and September. I think it's our role to be compassionately consistent. We are going to clean up encampments. And I know that that's disruptive. We give notice. We don't want to throw away folks' driver's license and birth certificates. That's not the intent of it. But we want to be responsive. And I think you have to recognize that I think the vast majority of the public, at least who participated in the survey, felt like the city wasn't doing enough. And you talk about good models in other cities. I've not seen one. I have not seen one that has done what we've done in setting those benchmarks. And we'll see. And as with anything else, if we get 6 months into it, or we get to next summer and we're having success in one area and challenges in another area, then we'll tweak it and move on. But I don't think we can ignore it. I think we've got to be responsive. We've got public dollars that have been invested in places for folks to go and get help, and we ought to take advantage of it.
So do you think San Antonio can be a leader on the issue of homelessness nationally?
Ashley, I just want to get it right here. I mean, maybe, right? I'm as much as I'm focused on what other cities do and what they don't do, I don't think very much about setting a good example for everybody else. I mean, I'm not wired that way. I do want to make sure that we're doing as best as we can here. And if we can be a model for somebody else, then great. But that does not drive our execution.
Makes sense. We had a column on Sunday from our founder, Robert Rivard, on a new study of cell phone tracking data that showed San Antonio ranking #1 in the recovery rate of non-resident workers in its downtown, with current activity standing at 85% of pre-COVID levels, so not quite 100%. Nashville finished second with 80%, and Midtown Manhattan was third at 78%. An encouraging number, certainly, but there's still a lot of recovery that needs to be made in overall foot traffic. And downtown office vacancies may be here to stay, given how thoroughly the pandemic changed the makeup of the American workforce. The tourism and hospitality industries here obviously drive much of our economy, so the experience of downtown for visitors and locals alike is crucial to our success as a city. Is downtown recovering quickly enough in your mind?
I think it is. I thought that was an interesting piece from Bob yesterday. I work downtown, so I see a lot of it. And I think intuitively, I felt that you're not at 100%, but downtown is bustling. And I think the trick is going to be some employers will remain in some hybrid version. A portion of the city workforce is still on hybrid. What we're seeing more and more is that folks want to come back to work, right? Even though they're on a hybrid. And I think that'll continue to evolve. From a visitor standpoint, I think the executing and finalizing the Alamo construction will be really important. Making sure that we get street construction downtown completed will be important. But I think what we'll see the other shoe drop and see what happens. I know there's some buildings that are having trouble occupying, but I'm a firm believer that a lot of that is cyclical, and at some point we'll pick back up. But we've got to finish some of the core work downtown. And as a major employer, I think we set a standard or set some tempo, and I think that's important.
Last month, Great Britain-based JCB announced plans to build its second and largest U.S. factory on San Antonio's south side, a move that officials are estimating will have a $30 billion economic impact for our city over the next decade. Sounds high, but maybe. Officials also said that San Antonio's workforce was a selling point for JCB. The city's workforce development program, Ready to Work, has aerospace and manufacturing as one of its target industries, but the program's dashboard right now only shows 59 people are in the training pipeline for those industries out of nearly 5,000 in the program overall. Another 849 are in training for jobs in transportation or warehousing. Workforce development is a complicated challenge, but do you think we're moving fast enough to develop our workforce and attract more jobs providers?
Well, no, we could always move faster. There's 4,900 people in training. When you went to college, how many years did it take you to get through college?
4.
4? Okay, well, an associate's degree is 2 years. A certificate, depending on the training, is 6 to 9 months. So Ready to Work is targeting both certificates, associates, and bachelors. So right now, today, there's 4,900. It's almost 5,000 people in one of those areas. And there's 80 plus different industries. And they range from the ones you mentioned to construction trade jobs and apprenticeship jobs. So I think it'll continue to move. I think that what's key for us is that Ready to Work is geared only and solely to employing individuals and making sure that they are prepared, whatever preparation is needed. And we've got over 300 employers that are engaged. In January, we'll start to pivot into phase 2, which is kind of direct training at companies, big and small, incumbent worker training, apprenticeships. There's going to be a lot of construction. There's a lot of demand in those areas, and internships. And so that'll open up 3 additional lanes, I think, of the process and the pipeline. At the end of the day, it's about getting people employed, and we'll get there. I'm confident of that. I think that probably last year, as we started the first year, I don't think we recognized the question I just asked you, right? It takes time for somebody to go through it. When you graduate or when you finish, that's the kind of the point that I'm looking at to shorten, because like you and I, when we graduated from college, it took us a couple of months to get a job. And what we're shooting for is that, you know, those employers are engaged and they know that when Erik Walsh graduates or finishes or completes his certificate, then on Friday, then he should report here on Monday. That's the part that we need to work on closing the gap on. You know, it was a major issue that JCB noticed as we were talking to them, and we've already initiated that conversation with them to help be their broker of training, whether that is contract through Alamo colleges, or if JCB wants to do their own training, we've got the candidates. We've got probably 8,000 or 9,000 applicants, and so the pipeline is full. We just got to make sure it's connected to an employer, and that's the piece that I think the city needs to do a better job of, and we're going to be focused on that this year as we start in January with those incumbent training opportunities. And then the last thing I'll say about JCB, is it just me, or ever since the announcement, I see JCB equipment like all over the place?
That's
like literally, I see it all over the place.
What's that effect called where you see it after you see it the first time? Yeah, anyway.
It's like when the new iPhone comes out and your battery starts dying on
you see it everywhere. Interesting. So with JCB and what happened there, what's going on with workforce development, speaking to meeting the moment, do you feel like San Antonio is starting to strike on a pitch that is intriguing to other potential employers that would come here, or is it still a hard sell?
No, I don't think it's a hard sell at all. I think but I mean, we just got through talking about a lot of the things that San Antonio is doing well. Workforce, cost of living, geography. I mean, the big part of JCB was the rail line and the proximity to Mexico. You know, the quality of life here, the richness of culture. I think all those things are help distinguish us from others. And I think, you know, the economy's in a bit of a period of adjustment where companies that have the wherewithal and are looking to expand smartly. It's one of the reasons why, you know, I think this San Antonio-Austin corridor is an attractive spot for a lot of industries.
There's so much speculation out there about this topic to the point where it's hard to tell what's actually going on. But the new local ownership of the San Antonio Missions minor league baseball team have signaled their desire to build a new stadium in or near downtown. And the Spurs have a 30-year lease agreement with Bexar County that expires in 2032, which is down the road, but it hasn't stopped the very loud whispers about a new downtown arena for them as well. What can you tell us about the possibility of a downtown sports venue or two in our near future?
So, I mean, those whispers have been going on for years and years and years. The mayor and I have had preliminary conversations with the Spurs earlier in the year. We've had conversations with the county about just generally the topic. And the mayor and I have had actually last week, a preliminary conversation with the Missions ownership. And they're trying to finalize a plan that I would expect we would see maybe by the end of the year. And so that's going to take a probably a long time and it's a very public conversation. Look at other cities, whether it's Major League Soccer or NBA or Major League Baseball. These issues have to ferment out in the open. I will tell you that from our standpoint, from the city standpoint, there is an opportunity for us to do something different downtown. About a year ago, we started looking at, you look at Austin and Dallas are going to tear down their convention centers and build brand new. So what are we doing from a competitive standpoint? Now, our convention center opened up in 2017. We don't need to do that. But where are our competitors at and in terms of market share. And so we will be looking at expanding the convention center, likely vertical, and making sure that we've got the ability to keep San Antonio vibrant. Part two of that is, what are we going to do with the Alamo Dome? The Alamo Dome celebrated their 30th anniversary this year. Bought and paid for in 5 years when it opened up 30 years ago. And we are busting at the seams. And we are going to have to, if we're going to keep that facility, we're going to have to spend a significant amount of money to remain competitive with other major multi-purpose stadiums in the country. And then you've got Hemisphere Park that has been incrementally over the last 20 years, 15 years, been received funding from our every 5-year municipal bond program. And by the time we finish that, it is going to be another 20 years from now. So how do we do something different in that entire area? Those are things we're looking at. And I suspect that as the city and the county and the Spurs ownership and the Mission Baseball folks finalize their plan, that there may be an opportunity. But when that happens, there's going to be a whole lot of thought and financial analysis behind that, and a lot of public conversation. We were successful in the last legislative session in getting a carve out around our convention center. Actually, it was something that the city of Fort Worth and the city of Dallas had. They were the only two cities in the state that had it. And Houston and San Antonio pursued that, and that'll help us with the financing for major efforts like the convention center and maybe the Alamo Dome. So I suspect we'll probably start that conversation with the council later on in the fall or early in 2024. So we'll see on everything else.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like it's been hard to figure out what's going on, so that's helpful. One of the biggest question marks, though, in the downtown stadium discussion or sports venue discussion is how they'd get funded. Do you think there's enough desire for new sports stadiums that voters would approve using tax or bond money to pay?
That's a better question for somebody else. I mean,
Yeah.
Go look at how other cities do it. They run the gambit. Some are 100% privately funded, some are 100% publicly funded. That's the debate and the conversation that needs to happen out in the public.
Yeah, deciding how to use surpluses from the city's utilities, CPS Energy, when they happen has been a pretty dramatic process in recent years on the city council. Meanwhile, the state legislature has been looking critically at municipally owned utilities. Mm-hmm. How much do you worry about the city's ability to protect that source of funding, which accounts for such a large share of the general fund?
Yeah, I mean, it's 26% of our general fund. And it is important, and I think I think we lose sight of the fact that the city purchased CPS 80 years ago, and we have a return on our investment. And unlike a lot of major cities in this state that only have two main revenue sources, property tax and sales tax, we have three. That gives us the ability to have a lower tax rate. That gives us the ability to be a little bit more diversified and weather recessions or changes in the economy. But it is a big part, and I think the city needs to continue to be a responsible owner. If CPS was a private company, they'd be paying property taxes like you and me. They would be paying for the use of our right-of-way for all the lines. And so they don't in this case, and we get a return on their revenue. And so we all benefit from that. And with 26% of that going to the general fund, that's where we fund all of our core functions: public safety, public works, parks, libraries, and what have you. The last 2 years have been interesting. Last year, when we were 75, and we always shoot to be, 2 or 3% above our revenue budget. But last summer, in summer of 2022, we were at 22%. And it all happened in late June, July, and August. And And that's why my proposed budget, and the council ended up approving it, was that 50 million of that would go back, so $75 million total. $50 million would go back to how we earned it, whether you were residential or commercial, and inside the city or outside the city. That helped us in the last legislative session, because I think it showed that the city and the council, as the governing board of the ownership of CPS, was responsible. But I think there will continue to be issues in future legislative sessions. And so I think as long as we do, the city, we do the right thing and are responsible, then, and unlike other cities that cause legislation like that, then I think we'll be able to defend it. We should be able to defend it. You know, part of that this year, we saw a big increase in CPS revenue right at the end of the fiscal year. Unlike last year's revenue, which was mainly driven by the price of fuel, natural gas, the money that we saw at the end of the year was based on CPS's capability to sell energy on the ERCOT market. And so that money came from everybody else that was buying CPS energy outside the city, which is a great thing, because, you know, we all benefit as San Antonians. The council spent 70% of that money on making changes and additions to the police department budget, the fire department budget, animal care services, so core functions. But you know, if you look at the last 15 years, there's been 4 years where we've gone more than 10% above our revenue, because you know it gets impacted by weather, demand, fuel, and wholesale prices, and it's hard to chart and it's hard to predict, and so we're moderately conservative. And the council had a conversation last week about making some adjustments to our financial policies to account for that, which are good guides, and any large organization should have. But will it happen in the future every year going forward? I don't know. Climate, obviously things are changing. But I think as long as we've got the financial policies in place to be able to react and have the latitude, then we'll be okay.
Mayor Nirenberg has signaled his intention to form a charter review commission to consider increasing salaries for the city council, mayor, and city manager, as well as adjusting the term limits for city manager. As the charter is currently written, a city manager can only serve a maximum of 8 years, meaning the last year you could hold the role is 2027. If the charter were to change, would you be interested in keeping your job past 2027, or do you have ambitions outside City Hall?
I'm interested in keeping my job this week and next week. That is, boy, I get a lot of questions about that, and I don't answer any of them, because you know there are other charter issues, and I think the mayor at some point is going to do that. But I keep my my personal and professional opinion to myself, because I don't think it's fair. That's for everybody else to talk about.
So if I were to ask you about the bonus, you wouldn't answer that one either?
What bonus?
So there's a potential to add a bonus for the city manager role to try and bring up additional, basically bring overall compensation in line with other cities around the country. Is that something that would be?
That's a question for somebody else. Okay. That's a question for the mayor and the council or the charter commission and ultimately the voters. That's not a question for the existing city manager.
I know you've been giving a lot of updates lately about the San Antonio airport. Why do you think the sorts of efforts we're undertaking there, like adding a new terminal and routes in the years to come, are important for our future?
Well, because we haven't grown that facility in forever, and it shows, and it has not been a focus. It is the most important thing that I have to do as city manager. Jesus Saenz, the airport director, who was the #2 at Bush Intercontinental and ran Houston Hobby, has put together a great team with a lot of experience. I spend a fair amount of time, probably more time, on the airport than any other topic, and we've got to deliver. I mean, look around. I mean, it certainly is convenient, right? The location. But the city hasn't made it a focus, and it has been a focus of mine. I know it is a major focus of the mayor's. The council has been extremely supportive. We are moving at lightning speed. We spent a lot of time looking at other cities, Nashville and Kansas City, that went through major renovations. And I'll tell you what, Nashville did it right. We took a lot of things away from Nashville on how they delivered the project, how they managed it, how they reported on it, how they worked with the airlines. And you know, as we continue to grow, like we talked about at the beginning of this session, making sure that we've got a facility that can serve this entire region is critical. The airport is a $5 billion a year economic impact to this region. And because of changes in the airline industry, flights out of Del Rio, Laredo, Corpus Christi have been cut back, and we've got folks driving from other parts of the state to use San Antonio International. We have our first transatlantic flight next May. We're up to 45 direct flight locations or destinations. Mexico expansion is booming, and you know, making sure that we are thoughtful about growing that airport is critical, and we just haven't done it. The city hasn't done it. The new terminal is going to be bigger than the 2 terminals that we've got now. It is going to be the new front door to the airport, and we're eager. The council will be selecting the general contractor here in December, and we'll finalize design next year and begin working and open that up in 2028.
Great. And we're going to have a conversation as part of Cityfest about transportation, the future of transportation in Bexar County. I think that's tomorrow morning, and Andrea Drush is going to moderate that one. We'll have Jesus Sines and Jeff Arndt from VIA on that panel, as well as some highway experts. So we think it'll be a really good conversation to talk a little more.
Well, hopefully Andrea asks Jesus about VTOLs, right? Because as we build this facility, we're looking not just what we need now, but what is the aviation industry going to pivot towards over the next 10, 15, 20 years? And VTOLs are an important part of that. Tampa Airport just had their first test of those aircraft. And I know Dallas and Chicago O'Hare are looking at testing. And so we're trying to be thoughtful. We've hired folks. Corrigan is our designer, and part of what they're looking at is just not the design of you know, where concessions are at and the gates, but what does that facility need to be for the next 20 years? So.
Now, you just came this morning from a press conference about adding new police officers at SAPD. Also, there have been a number of recent high-profile shootings of police officers by suspects with violent criminal records who are out on bail or parole. And the San Antonio Police Department has been looking at its approaches to de-escalation, especially in mental health crises, in the wake of the shootings of Eric Cantu and Melissa Perez by police officers. San Antonio's hotspot policing strategy has shown some positive initial results, with reports of violent crime down 12.6% citywide in the first 6 months of the year, though crime is up overall slightly by 1.5% due to an increase of property crimes, mostly driven by reports of motor vehicle theft. Yeah. Looking at the full picture, as we talk about meeting the moment in San Antonio, are you confident that San Antonio is a safe place for people to live? And what would you like to see change in our strategies on public safety?
Well, yes, I believe San Antonio is safe, but this is kind of rippling throughout the country. There are, you know, violent crime seems more violent, and I don't know if we are collectively being desensitized to violence because of things that happen in other parts of the world. What we can do is make sure that we've got the resources and the follow-through to be able to mitigate and respond, whether it is violent or property crimes. And you're right, that slight increase in overall crime in San Antonio is due to motor vehicle thefts. The work with UTSA and the hotspot policing has, although not rocket science, and very intuitive, has resulted in really drastic reductions in violent crime. And so how do we build upon that? Part of that is making sure that we grow the police department. And right now, we reported to the council in the springtime that on average, the average patrol officer spends 60% of their time on a call, at a call, writing a report after a call, and 40% of their time available for patrol, available to talk to a neighborhood, just being visible. And the hotspot policing is anchored in visibility. And so what we shared with the council was a recommendation that let's flip that. Let's have 60% proactive time and 40% of that officer's time spent on call. And we'll need to add 360 officers over the next 3 to 5 years. This year we added 117, 50 of which were funded by the federal government. And preliminarily we're targeting an additional 65 in fiscal year 25. We'll see how we stand financially next summer. But increasing that visibility factor affects a lot of things. It can deter crime. It can provide a faster response time when something happens. And given the growth of the city that is happening and will continue to happen, we've got to make sure that we step that up. There are plenty of cities that have fallen behind. And if you fall behind in those high growth areas, then it's really hard to catch up. So we're trying to stay ahead of the curve a little bit. Secondly, our violence prevention efforts led by Metro Health are really trying to get to the root of violent crime. And it's not all the police department. There are elements of what the city does in the neighborhoods and with individuals that need assistance to provide that hands-on care, to avoid and prevent violent crime. And those two areas working together hopefully mitigates that. And that's our basic plan. But part of what and the city and the county are working together on this issue of those officers that were shot, with 6 officers shot over the course of 2.5 weeks, which is unheard of. And we're working right now. In fact, there's a meeting happening right now about what are those gaps, because from the public's perspective, they don't care. Well, I shouldn't say it like that. They're not interested in whose responsibility is what, right? The criminal justice system is supposed to work. Whether it's the police department or the court system, it's just supposed to work. And there are probably little individual gaps in between the shoulders of agencies where we can tighten up. But certainly, we've seen a disturbing pattern, and I think there's things that we've identified that with the county that we can do better together. Because at the end of the day, it's about making sure the public feels safe and is safe, and that folks are being held accountable for whatever they're tied up in.
Great. We are just out of time, so thank you so much for being here, City Manager Walsh, and thank you all for being here. Yeah, go ahead. We'll invite Angie back up.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. What an insightful, informative discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks to Lee and Eric so much for this. But I also want to give a special thank you to KLRN. We met with Sherry probably about a year ago and said, hey, what can we do together? We both care about the city. We both care about local news and civic engagement. And that one little tour launched this beautiful partnership. This is our 4th event with KLRN, and they are just a treasure, and we thank them so much for this lovely partnership that benefits all of you. Speaking of insightful and thoughtful, again, go look at cityfestsa.org for the rest of the programming for this week. Come out for happy hour. But one last thing, if you care about civic engagement, if you care about democracy, I really invite you to go to our website and get more engaged. You can get more engaged by subscribing to our newsletters. We have a 4th new newsletter product we launched last week called Live Like a Local. And But again, this journalism isn't free to produce, but it's free to consume for all of San Antonians. And here's the thing. We found out on Friday that every incremental dollar we raise in the last 2 months of the year is going to be 100% matched up to $100,000. So if you've not become a member of the San Antonio Report, now's the time. Thank you all so much.